LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the April 8th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup, delayed till the next morning for reasons I'll explain later. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out the weekend's 15 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use, media criticism, and political analysis show for you all tonight. The political comedy sources will be from both Saturday Night Live's Cold Open with Alec Baldwin playing Donald Trump and some Weekend Update jokes from Saturday Night Live, plus some monologue jokes from Real Time with Bill Maher. I'll also, of course, have the other 12 clips from the Big Five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. You can see the topic I'm covering listed down in the video description, along with a link to my clip list if you want to see the notes that I take for myself and see the 15 clips. I'll have a bonus Sandy clip from when Sandy was confused there was no show last night, and also I'm saving a special clip at the end. Chuck Todd from NBC's Meet the Press argues with a true Trump supporter, or like a true Trump believer from the Trump administration, Peter Navarro, about whether the Washington Post is fake news. That's one of my favorite clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows. But like I said, I'm going to start with the big topic, Trump plays to his base. That's one way of interpreting what Trump's been doing. There are actually a few different ways to interpret it that the different news analysis shows took. I think it was NBC's Meet the Press that really decided he was playing to his base with the way he's been behaving. I'm going to show you some comedy clips that sort of look at the ways he's playing to his base, mainly on immigration and then attacking Amazon, Jeff Bezos, Washington Post. I'll start off with the cold open. Here's Donald Trump, played by Alec Baldwin, throwing away his script and then answering some questions both about immigration and Amazon. I've put together a couple different parts of the cold open. As usual, you can see the entire cold open for free on YouTube at a link I put down in the video description. Here's about 2¼ minutes of that cold open here.
I'd just like to read a prepared statement to prove that I can read. Okay, so here goes. God, I hate this. Okay. Do not congratulate Putin. No, wait, that's a note to me. Okay, just forget about that. Okay, reading and go. The United States has a special relationship with the Baltic nations. God, I want to riff so bad. We are so proud to honor the centennial of their independence from Russia. God, this sucks. Because our nations are truly friends. Okay, thank God that's over. Please, time to freestyle. First step, a big congratulations to Vladimir Putin. He won a great, very transparent victory in the Russian election. Fantastic job, Putin. Even though no one's ever been tougher on Russia than I am, including Hitler. Yeah, you.
Mr. President, why do you keep attacking Amazon? Do you really hate Jeff Bezos that much?
I do. I hate Jeff. Because he's way richer than me, and he admits to being bald, so I feel threatened on 2 levels. Next question. Let's mix it up and do a Baltic reporter this time, please.
Yes, my question is, why are you sending the National Guard to the Mexican border? Doesn't that seem, how do you say, pointless?
Wow, seriously? You're gonna come at me like that? Do I come to the shoe that you live in and slap the potato out of your mouth? Okay? Look, we have to keep our borders secure. Mexico is sending caravans full of immigrants toward us. And I've seen these caravans, truck after truck, barreling across the desert. The trucks are covered in metal and spikes. There's a guy strapped in front just wailing away on a flaming guitar. And there are freaky albino dudes shimmying around skinny little poles.
Mr. President, I believe you are describing the movie Mad Max Fury Road.
That's right. They are some mad Mexicans. Okay, one more question.
Mad Mexicans. I don't know. That was a pretty long way to go for that joke. The parody of how Donald Trump is getting his policy decisions, and especially the caravan of immigrants coming through Mexico and sending troops to the border. That was all because of something that was on Fox and Friends. So the Mad Max Fury Road parody, I guess it's a funny idea, but I think that was a little bit long and drawn out for the punchline there. And the one joke I really liked in that set was when Alec Baldwin, as Donald Trump was saying that no one has ever been tougher on Russia than he has, not even Hitler. That was, I don't know, maybe most people don't like Hitler jokes. I happen to like that particular Hitler joke. But overall, I thought the writing at Saturday Night Live on Saturday night wasn't that great. Those were that was like the one joke I really liked. And I'll show you a couple jokes from Weekend Update. But I think in the political comedy competition this week, the jokes from Bill Maher, at least the ones I selected out here from his monologue, edged out the Saturday Night Live jokes. The better writers, better week. You can tell me if you agree with me, but here's also about 2¼ minutes from Real Time with Bill Maher. This is the jokes that I liked from the monologue on Friday night over here.
The great news, everybody, is that Donald Trump finally is unfettered. You know, he fired like all of his original cabinet, so he's got some great new ideas of his own. Yeah, he's just riffing now. Like this week, troops at the border. Great. Yeah, we're putting National Guard troops at the border, even though border arrests from Mexico are at their lowest level since 1971. Somebody has to tell him, to have a Mexican standoff, you need Mexicans. I mean, but, you know, people are saying, why now? Why now? Why suddenly now troops at the border? Well, for the same reason everything happens in this country now, because the President of the United States saw something on Fox News. They were showing some fear porn about a caravan. Did you hear that? A caravan. Is coming up from Central America, migrants heading north through Mexico. That's why now. Because he watches Fox News all day. If he watched The Price is Right, we'd be sending troops to San Francisco to confront Rice-A-Roni. No wonder the stock market is going up and down every day and tanking and coming back and going back down, because no one knows what the fuck is happening anymore. We're building a wall, or maybe not. We're having a trade war with China, or maybe not. We're getting out of Syria, or maybe not. Yeah, this president, who has constantly said all the time, never tell the enemy what you're doing, that's stupid, this week announced we're pulling out of Syria. Well, come on, we're going to need those troops for the upcoming invasion of Amazon. Oh, you saw this? I told you he's got a lot of ideas. Yeah, he's got a big feud with, he hates Amazon. He is mad at Amazon. He says Amazon is using the post office as a delivery system.
So, like I said, I thought those jokes were a little better. I like the needing the troops for the invasion of Amazon, and I'll show you a little bit more about the Trump war on Amazon, and also the upcoming attack on Facebook from both sides. Both Republicans and Democrats are probably going to be attacking Mark Zuckerberg when he testifies to Congress this Tuesday, and I'll have a couple clips on that near the end. But I also like the Mexican standoff joke. I don't know, is that a prejudice joke? Is the term Mexican standoff a non-PC term? I actually cut out one of the jokes in between there that I thought was too prejudiced in favor of Mexicans. So for my actual editing of the monologue is also a sign of my fair use media criticism, because if you want to see the joke I cut out, you can go down in the video description and see the entire monologue on the Real Time with Bill Maher YouTube channel for free. They always upload the monologue every week, and that's why I show it in that video player from YouTube. And before I get to the actual news clips, I want to show a couple more jokes that I don't think were as good as those jokes, but these are the Weekend Update jokes, which are kind of analogous to the Bill Maher monologue, both on the subject of immigration and then the whole Amazon thing. And this is just about a minute of a couple jokes I edited together from Weekend Update over here.
President Trump deployed the National Guard to the Mexican border, even though reports show that illegal border crossings are at their lowest levels since 1971. It's all part of Trump's philosophy. If it ain't broke, I'll break it.
So now Trump is just sending the National Guard, not even the Army. This is such a Trump move. He promises a big, beautiful wall, and then the wall becomes a fence. And then the fence becomes the Army. And then the Army becomes the National Guard. Pretty soon, it's just going to be a beware of dog sign.
This week, Shade Queen Donald Trump also repeatedly attacked Amazon on Twitter. If I were Amazon, I would just troll him right back. I just constantly send the White House copies of Fire and Fury and Stormy Daniels DVDs, or things Trump really hates, like vegetables. Kremlin officials are also saying that during a call last month, President Trump invited Vladimir Putin to come visit him at the White House. Worse, when Trump hung up, he accidentally said, "Love you, bye."
I can imagine that happening. Trump saying "love you, bye," talking to Putin. No, but it was a good joke, and the sending the Stormy Daniels tapes and the copies of Fire and Fury, that was okay. But one of the things that I wanted to, the joke at the very beginning, I wanted to play there because he said that Colin Jost was saying that Trump's theory is if it ain't broke, I will break it. That's what he's doing with the immigration system. But actually, that's kind of the opposite of what you're going to see Chuck Todd say as his introduction to the news analysis or the news summary from NBC's Meet the Press yesterday morning. This is Chuck Todd talking about. First, he says that it's not if it's not broke, I'll break it. It's if something works, keep doing it. Is basically what he's trying to do, which is the playing to his base theme. That's what I was talking about there. A couple different theories about what Donald Trump's doing. Is he playing to his base? Is he Trump unfettered, throwing away the script? Those are like the different labels that people were putting on what Trump's been doing. I think playing to his base, he got a lot of pushback from the omnibus spending deal that he signed that a lot of people, especially at Fox News, didn't like. And that I think Fox News really is his base or represents his base to him. That's why he spends so much time live tweeting what happens on Fox News, especially Fox and Friends. And that's how he keeps close to his base. And that's sort of covered in this NBC Meet the Press news summary, which I think was the best. I'm going to compare it to the ABC news summary after this, which focuses a little more on Syria. There was some Syria news, which I'm not really going to cover, but you'll see there's a little bit of Syria news in the NBC Meet the Press coverage, but mostly the weird actions by Donald Trump. Is it that he's playing to his base? You can let me know what you think after we watch that clip together over here.
President Trump's latest motto could be, if at first you succeed, do it and do it again. When he ran for president, Mr. Trump sensed that the country's mood was changing, and he adopted more nationalistic themes. Immigrants were flooding the country, so it was time to secure the border. China was ripping us off, so it was time to hit them with a trade war. The world was taking advantage of us, so it was time to get tough again. Only he could fix it, so it was time to make America great again. Mr. Trump did it his way with a loyal base of supporters. Now, facing some challenging poll numbers with the midterms and the Mueller investigation, rather than trying to broaden his appeal, he's hunkering down, hugging his base once again, from immigration to trade to protecting an embattled EPA administrator revered by his core supporters. President Trump is delivering what his base wants, and once again, he's doing things his way.
If you have a baby on our land, congratulations. That baby is a United States citizen.
President Trump is refocusing his attention on the nationalist policies which he campaigned on, attempting to shore up goodwill among base supporters and the conservative media that influences them. On immigration, frustrated that only about 33 miles of new fencing is funded under the 2018 congressional spending bill, angering some supporters.
But as I see it right now, tonight, the wall's never going to happen.
The president announced a surprise plan to work with governors to send up to 4,000 National Guard troops to the border.
Until we can have a wall and proper security, we're going to be guarding our border with the military.
I look at it as kind of a show.
And he returned to the unsubstantiated campaign claims that he frequently used on immigration.
Women are raped at levels that nobody's ever seen before.
On trade, the president is threatening another $100 billion in tariffs on goods from China.
We can't continue to allow this to happen, where hundreds of billions of dollars is taken out of our country.
Echoing populist rhetoric he used on the campaign trail.
Didn't they say we're going to lose a trade war? We're already losing the trade war, folks.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average, touted by Mr. Trump as a symbol of his success in office, has fallen more than 4% since he announced new tariffs on March 1st.
I'm not saying there won't be a little pain.
And the political backlash among Republicans on Capitol Hill has been intense. Senator Ben Sasse called the president's plan the dumbest possible way to do this. And some White House aides have even suggested that Mr. Trump's proposed tariffs are simply a negotiating tactic.
You know, there are carrots and sticks in life, but he is ultimately a free trader.
Even on his embattled EPA administrator, Scott Pruitt, the president is taking his cues from the base instead of his own advisors. Pruitt is facing questions about his ties to a lobbyist from whom he rented a Capitol Hill condo, requests for special perks, and raises for his aides against the advice of the White House.
You didn't know that they got these large pay raises?
I did not know that they got the pay raises until yesterday.
While many of the White House professional staff, led by Chief of Staff John Kelly, have advised the president to fire Pruitt, Pruitt is a conservative star, and allies have launched a coordinated campaign to save his job.
He has become, outside of Trump, the single biggest target for the American left.
And so far, the president has listened, and Pruitt has his public confidence.
Scott has done a fantastic job. I think he's a fantastic person.
And joining me now from West Palm Beach, Florida.
So, yeah, I thought that was a pretty good news summary of Trump's week and why Trump is doing what he's doing on immigration and trade and the tech companies and the staff shakeups. Like I said, I thought the NBC news summary was the best of all the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News. I have it memorized there. It comes up whenever I want it now. I say those big five corporate outlets so often. And I did like the ABC summary, which is just a little bit longer. It focused a lot more on immigration at the end, and you'll see they did a long interview with the White House Homeland Security Advisor, Tom Bossert. I'll play that clip from that about whether the whole move of National Guard troops to the border, whether that's necessary or not. And the answer, of course, no, not necessary, but it's about playing to his base, which was, like I said, the theme of the NBC Meet the Press news summary, that he was trying to do what worked before and playing to his base because of problems with his poll numbers and the Mueller investigation. And I actually think that that interpretation of Trump's activities on immigration and tariffs and tech companies and all the rest, that is the explanation that I personally subscribe to, but you can let me know what you think. This is a slightly different interpretation from Martha Raddatz over at ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where she's focusing more on how he's throwing away the script. The more, he's now unfettered. He's like growing into the job and getting rid of all the people who tell him no. And the two things that I think ABC does better than NBC is the focus on immigration at the end, you'll see, and also the way that the Trump administration keeps contradicting itself on important issues. You saw Bill Maher cover that in his monologue about they say one thing, they say another, they say one thing, they say another. It's not really easy to understand the Trump administration position on a lot of issues, which is something that is covered in this ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos clip, Martha Raddatz's introduction to the program yesterday morning here.
And thanks for joining us this Sunday. Who can forget that moment this week, the president literally throwing away the script? But for weeks, we've been watching him tear through tradition. As usual, Trump seemed to be calling the shots, taking his staff by surprise and leaving them to fill in the blanks. His supporters see a champion, a president advocating for their rights, voicing their concerns, out to fight for them. His opponents see a disorganized CEO calling out orders, forgetting that Congress is not beholden to the president. However you see it, there seems to be one constant. For every new announcement, the president seems to say one thing and the administration says another. The president retaliated against China's proposed tariffs, now considering an additional $100 billion in tariffs and escalating fears of a trade war. as his economic director seemed to try and tamp them down, saying, "We're not running a trade war." The president said he wants to withdraw troops from Syria soon, but that same day, 3 top national security officials reinforced the U.S. commitment to the country, and the Pentagon and State Department said there's no timeline for withdrawal. The president defended EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt, publicly praising his work. But that same day, a White House spokesperson had this ominous statement: "I can't speak to the future of Scott Pruitt." And then there's the president's announcement on the border. While their messaging was mostly on the same page, the president seemed to be one step ahead of his staff.
Until we can have a wall and proper security, we're going to be guarding our border with the military.
It's a bit more complicated. There are limitations to what the military can do at the border, perhaps prompting the Homeland Security Secretary to later clarify.
The National Guard will deploy personnel in support of CBP's border security mission.
And support is all they can do. So why this announcement now?
This is a caravan of a lot of people coming in this case from Honduras. If it reaches our border, our laws are so weak and so pathetic.
It all happened as images of a caravan carrying Central American migrants filled TV screens early in the week. But that caravan traveling through Mexico has been organized annually for more than 15 years. It's designed to help migrants stay safe as they seek asylum and not to cross the U.S. border illegally. In fact, organizers say most of the migrants' journeys end in Mexico.
I would build a great wall, and nobody builds walls better than me, believe me.
Trump has pushed for a wall from day one. But why the urgency for the guard at the border?
I think, what I would say is the numbers continue to increase.
This statement, despite the fact that the overall number of crossings on the border hit a record low last fiscal year, with barriers put in place before the Trump administration.
Along our route, we've already seen different kinds of barriers and fences dividing the U.S. and Mexico. In fact, there are nearly 700 miles of barriers already set up.
But Trump continues his push to expand those barriers, in spite of questions about whether it's the best use of money or resources.
If there is a wall before that needs to be replaced, it's being replaced by a new wall. So this is the Trump border wall. In many cases, it will...
Replacing current wall would count as new wall in your words.
Yes, it would.
And joining me now is White House
joining her then is White House Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert, who in the clip I'll show in just a couple minutes actually references that news summary from Martha Raddatz. That's one of the reasons I show the news summaries, is because they influence the answers that the newsmakers give. And that was a good news summary on the immigration issue. It pointed out that the border crossings are at like a 45-year low, and that the whole caravan thing that Trump got all upset about because he watched it on Fox and Friends one morning is something that's been going on like for 15 years, and it doesn't usually end up with any undocumented immigrants coming across the border, except some people who have legitimate claims for asylum. And the whole Trump immigration response is kind of ridiculous. And I'm going to, in the clip after next, I'll show how Martha Raddatz points all that out to the White House Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert. But I have two more news summaries. I want to get to the CNN State of the Union news summary and then the Fox News Sunday news summary, which is really short and superficial. But I did want to point out that Martha Raddatz covered Syria somewhat before the clip I just showed you, the breaking news from Syria with the possible chemical weapons attack. And that was also covered pretty extensively on CBS's Face the Nation in a clip I'm not going to show because I'm not going to, that's one of the topics I'm not going to cover. It was just breaking, and for a variety of reasons. But that's what starts off this CNN State of the Union clip. It's the very beginning. Jake Tapper says, "The state of our union this week is horrified," which is this chemical weapons attack. And you'll see a little news coverage of that before he also talks about how Trump is sending, or how Trump is tweeting about the trade deficit, and there's some contradictions, but this is a much shorter news summary, but it's the way CNN covered it yesterday morning over here.
Washington, where the State of our Union is horrified by the reports coming out of Syria, where dozens have been killed after an apparent chemical attack. The president tweeting just seconds ago, quote, "Many dead, including women and children, in mindless chemical attack in Syria. Area of atrocity is in lockdown and encircled by Syrian army, making it completely inaccessible to outside world. President Putin, Russian, and Iran are responsible for backing Animal Assad. Big price," unquote. Reports of this bloodshed comes just a week after President Trump unexpectedly announced that the U.S. will withdraw from Syria, quote, "very soon." This devastating news as the president is ramping up a battle on the economic front, continuing to escalate the confrontation with China over trade. The president tweeting Saturday, quote, "The United States hasn't had a trade surplus with China in 40 years. They must end unfair trade, take down barriers, and charge only reciprocal tariffs. The U.S. is losing $500 billion a year and has been losing billions of dollars for decades. Cannot continue." This morning, the president tweeting that he and Chinese President Xi will, quote, "always be friends no matter what happens on trade." But the back and forth has grown into a tit for tat of threats. Thursday, President Trump threatened to bring $100 billion more in tariffs against Chinese imports on top of the $50 billion he announced earlier in the week. And here with me now is the top White House economic advisor, Larry Kudlow.
Oh, and I will show you some Larry Kudlow clips. They're coming up. I even put Larry Kudlow's name in the title of this video because this was Larry Kudlow's big debut. I remember Larry Kudlow from years ago when I used to watch the McLaughlin Group, but I think I pretty much explained what I thought about that news summary before I showed it. It was much briefer, but not quite as brief as the Fox News Sunday news summary, which, I don't know, is it biased or is it just brief? Because they talk about Syria, but of course they don't put it in the context of Trump last year drawing this red line and then bombing Assad, and now he's just calling him Animal Assad, but so far it doesn't look like there's going to be any military response because he just called for a pullout from Syria, which that was covered in all the other news programs, but not in this Fox News summary that you're about to see. And is it because Fox News is biased, or is it because this is just a 50-second news summary? You can let me know after we watch that clip together over here.
Again from Fox News in Washington. We begin with breaking news. The State Department is monitoring reports of a poison gas attack in a rebel-held town near Syria's capital of Damascus. Video from Syrian activists claims to show victims, including children, getting hosed down. A human rights group says dozens have been killed in the attack, and we'll stay on top of this story. Now to the face-off over trade between the U.S. and China, which has sent tensions soaring and markets tumbling. In the latest move, President Trump threatened to impose tariffs on another $100 billion in Chinese exports, something that nation has vowed to fight. A trade war would have serious consequences for consumers, businesses, and investors. Joining me now, President Trump's new top White House
Larry Kudlow again, and like I said, I will be showing a Larry Kudlow clip, and including a Larry Kudlow clip where he says that Mark Zuckerberg better show up for his testimony before Congress wearing a suit because he's really sick of seeing him just in that Silicon Valley T-shirt getup where he's, he's like the CEO of this big corporation. He should wear a suit and not a T-shirt. That'll be an upcoming Larry Kudlow clip, but I think I explained what was lacking in that Fox News Sunday news summary about the way, the mixed signals from Donald Trump on Syria. And then at the end you saw that they were kind of worried about this whole trade war, but it's because of the way it affects investors and, of course, the Fox News, corporate class, or I don't know, who do you think is the real Trump base? Is it the white working class, or is it just white people at all levels? I don't know. I'm just finishing up reading, no, not the wrong way, this book here, 8 Years in Power from Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I'm reading the epilogue where he argues pretty persuasively that the Trump base is basically white people at all economic and educational and demographic, the defining characteristic of the Trump voter, where Trump is very successful, is at all different demographic levels, as long as the people are white, he wins. And so I don't know. You can let me know what you think about that. And I think that kind of plays into why he is playing up this whole immigration crisis and the threat at the border and sending troops to the border, even though there's no real need for it. And that's the subject of this next clip that I promised you earlier, from when Martha Raddatz did her whole immigration summary in the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary. Then she had an interview with the White House Homeland Security Advisor Thomas Bossert, and pointed out a lot of the contradictions in the current focus on sending National Guard troops to the border. You know, that border crossings are at a 45-year low, and you'll see Tom Bossert has to respond to the ABC News summary I showed earlier, where they pointed out that this caravan that Donald Trump has gotten so excited about is something that's been going on for like 15 years. And anyway, I will talk about that clip with you after we watch Martha Raddatz do a pretty good job of cross-examining White House Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert over here.
Good morning.
You know, the president's announcement seemed to catch some in the administration by surprise. How far in advance did you know he was going to announce that he would deploy the National Guard?
Yeah, it's funny what the outside perspective must be, because it didn't surprise me in the slightest. I think President Trump's been pretty clear on this as a priority since he began his run for office. So I think a number of things
But not the Guard, necessarily.
No, I think the Guard's always been something that we've considered, and what we do is we look carefully at trend lines. And so there's been a little bit of misreporting on this, and see if I can help with that. A lot of the reporting tends to suggest that because we've seen record lows over the last 40 years on an annual basis, that's good enough. We've got a leaking boat on our border, and we're all quibbling with how much water's in the boat and how fast we're bailing it out. I think at this point, the president's been pretty clear, enough is enough, fix the actual problem and stop that leak.
But you bring up those lows, 46-year low in apprehensions. So what was the crisis here? Why did they have to rush the National Guard?
Yeah, so this is the problem with statistics and comparisons. What I'll throw back to you is the more appropriate comparison. What we briefed the president on was the trends that we're seeing, and what we're seeing is a 200% increase this month, March, this past month, in apprehensions. It's alarming. It's an over 200% increase, and we're talking about apprehending over 50,000 people attempting to cross our border in 1 month.
Is that a seasonal uptick? Hasn't that happened in the past?
No, so that's exactly the point, Martha. The seasonal uptick normally begins next month, and what we're doing is taking action now at the appropriate time instead of waiting, as others have in the past, for that uptick to get in front of us.
And did someone in the White House or somewhere in the administration conduct any kind of intelligence assessment on why you needed to do this now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Customs and Border Protection leadership provide us briefings on a regular basis, and that's where we get our statistics. So the over 200% increase, coupled with the pending seasonal uptick, coupled with the caravan that is an annual event, all trended in the wrong direction. So the problem here, and the point to remember, is while there was an improvement, it's a comparative improvement. That has nothing to do with the alarming trend of border crossings that we're seeing. And at this point, we don't have the capacity to address that problem. That's the more troubling point the president needed to address.
And we know the National Guard can't legally apprehend anyone trying to get across the border. So what do they actually do?
Well, there's a lot of question on what they can do. What we're going to do, the president did something separately that was not necessarily as well reported, and that is he put out a memorandum directing his cabinet to not catch and release, but to catch and detain. That's a big difference. So the Guard can do whatever the federal government in this case is authorized to do. What we've chosen to do with them is to augment the Customs and Border Protection officers who are so well trained to interdict these border crossers.
Do you have any idea how much this will cost? The federal government will pay for it.
Yeah, the costs will depend on our time phase deployment and how long we stay there. Maybe this is a good opportunity to explain how it works. The purpose of using the National Guard isn't just to augment the Customs and Border Protection capabilities. It'll be short term, and I think the message there is CBP is hiring. We need more people, and they're looking to onboard them and train them now. But the message here is that governors are also equally troubled. This isn't President Trump's concoction where he sits around thinking, I need to make a political point. This is an operational need, an operational deficiency. We have a requirement that's being met. Not only are the border states and the border governors complying and applying their National Guard resources, I bet when you're done with this, we're going to see the majority of governors of this country sending their Guard forces.
And you talk...
So, like I said, I thought Martha Raddatz did a fairly good job there of cross-examining Tom Bossert and pointing out the inconsistencies and the lack of factual basis for sending these troops to the border. I think this is more about playing to Trump's base. You know, I noticed when I was looking at the live viewer comments back about 20 minutes ago, no, more than 20 minutes ago, Cad Monzor, I don't know how to pronounce that, Cad Monzohar 2 said that one of the good SNL skits that I didn't talk about and I didn't take a clip from was the Game of Life DACA edition. With, you know, DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, referring to the so-called dreamers, the kids or the people who were brought here as kids by their parents, are undocumented immigrants, but you know, they have to be in college or in the military service, or, you know, and have no criminal record, and they're like really good contributing members of our country, and in our communities, but they are about to be losing their legal status that was granted them by an executive order by President Obama, and that was supposed to expire on March 5th, because last September President Trump revoked that order, but it's in litigation, and courts have stayed that and said he didn't do it the right way, so they actually aren't losing their legal status yet, but it could happen at any time if a court decision gets overturned by a higher court, so it's a really precarious situation. And so the whole, I appreciate that comment from one of my live viewers, and I appreciate the live viewers who show up even at these weird times. You know, I promised I would explain why I'm doing this on Monday morning instead of the usual Sunday night, and that's because this has been a really busy weekend for me, both with this big family occasion that I had to travel to and come back Sunday morning, and then there's this big ACLU conference and lobby day that's going on right now. I'm going to go back to a rally. I may even take video of that rally and upload it later tonight, but the whole ACLU of California community of activists comes to Sacramento once a year, and that's yesterday and today, and I wanted to participate in that somewhat, so I haven't gotten a lot of sleep if my commentary seems a little bit disjointed, and I had to delay my LiberalViewer Sunday live clip roundup to Monday morning, as happens occasionally, and hopefully won't happen again. Well, I think won't happen again in the foreseeable future, but anyway, I'm going to leave the whole immigration issue, even though that's something I'm learning more about from the ACLU at Conference and Lobby Day, and I want to move on to a couple clips about EPA the EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. You'll see in the clip after next, Lindsey Graham has quite a bit of difficulty just saying the word administrator. Maybe he hasn't gotten a lot of sleep either, but I'm going to start with Susan Collins. It's going to be two clips, one from Senator Susan Collins, one from Senator Lindsey Graham, showing like two different, well, Susan Collins is the only Republican who didn't vote for EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt, and I like this clip from CNN's State of the Union. Jake Tapper, I think, explains a lot of the wrongdoing that Scott Pruitt has been involved in the question that he asked Senator Susan Collins, and she says that, you know, there's nothing that the Congress can do now. We should have voted against him, but she still opposes him on policy grounds. And then I think Lindsey Graham has a couple little, you know, snide remarks and shows the view of Republicans who actually did vote for Scott Pruitt and approve of his disastrous policy decisions that hurt the environment, but still, I don't know, maybe he is going to get fired. But we can compare the two sides of the Republican Party in these two clips. First, there's a 2-minute, 15-second clip from Susan Collins, senator from Maine, one of the most moderate Republicans out there. Over here.
President Trump tweeted last night that EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt is doing, quote, a great job. The president excused a number of controversies. Some of the controversies include that Pruitt rented a room from an energy lobbyist for $50 a night, which is well below market value. He asked for a private charter plane membership costing $100,000 a month, although they didn't actually do that. He wanted to buy a bulletproof desk, which would cost $70,000. He requested sirens in traffic because he was late for dinner. He reassigned staffers when they raised ethics concerns about Pruitt's actions and spending. This is, of course, in addition to what we learned from the AP this week, that the EPA has spent almost $3 million on Pruitt's security detail. You were the only Republican senator to vote against Pruitt's nomination in the first place. Do you think he should resign or be fired?
Well, first of all, let me say that the actions taken by Scott Pruitt in the environmental arena, whether it's trying to undermine the Clean Power Plan or weaken the restrictions on lead or undermine the methane rules, are reasons enough to validate my decision to oppose his confirmation. This daily drip of accusations of excessive spending and ethical violations serve to further distract the agency from accomplishing its very important mission. I think Congress needs to do some oversight. After all, we don't know the extent of the recommendations made by Mr. Pruitt's security team, but on policy grounds alone, I think Scott Pruitt is the wrong person to head the EPA. So should he resign or be fired? Well, that is a position that only the president can take at this point. The Congress has no role as far, now that he's been confirmed. I voted against confirming him. I believe that my position was the correct one and has been validated by his actions. You voted for the Republican tax reform.
So, like I said before, when I introduced the clip, that is the most moderate Republican, the only Republican who voted against Scott Pruitt, who, as EPA administrator, still opposing him on policy grounds, and so that doesn't really give you a sense of whether he's losing support of Republicans in Congress, because Scott Pruitt never really had Susan Collins' support. But I wanted to contrast that with Senator Lindsey Graham, who is a big advocate of the policies of, the getting rid of regulations, which mean, clean air, clean water, all that kind of stuff that Scott Pruitt is doing. That's that's the really dangerous part, as Susan Collins was saying there. Well, Lindsey Graham doesn't care about that stuff, but he is starting to lose a little confidence. And unlike Susan Collins, he does say that Congress has some oversight responsibility, which he's waiting to think about, or waiting to hear about what Scott Pruitt has to say about, especially about the room that he got for $50 a night. And I think Jake Tapper laid out all the wrongdoing pretty clearly in his question to Susan Collins. This is under a minute from Lindsey Graham on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, responding to a question from Martha Raddatz, and I think actually showing that Lindsey Graham has a sense of humor. Maybe you can tell me what you think after you watch this clip with me over here.
Senator Graham, just finally back to domestic politics. EPA Chief Scott Pruitt has been under fire this week after numerous reports questioning his spending habits. Do you think he should go?
I think he's done a good job, but I'm looking to see what the Oversight Committee is going to say. The one thing I can say, if you're the EPA administrator and two lobbyists change the locks, you've got a problem. The bottom line is, doesn't look good. I like Scott. He's done a good job from my point of view as being EPA administrator administrator, but the Congress has an oversight role here, and we'll see where this goes.
Does it look like he's engaged in questionable behavior to you?
I don't think you could get a room for $50 a night.
It'd be tough to do in Washington, that's for sure. Thanks very much, Senator Graham.
Thank you.
Coming up,
So I don't know, is Senator Lindsey Graham losing confidence in EPA administrator? I don't know. He sounded almost like a Foghorn Leghorn in that clip. Administrator. Well, I'm sorry. I often have problems when I'm doing live streams, so I can't really criticize Senator Lindsey Graham, who is actually fairly articulate when he appears on these programs over and over again. He's quite a frequent guest on these programs, and I think it's because he has a colorful way of... I almost had problems saying... See? I had to say colorful twice there. So anyway, I thought that was kind of an amusing clip. That's why I included that with the two Scott Pruitt clips. I have now two clips on the trade war, the looming trade war with China, and then two clips on the Trump administration attack on the tech companies, and that'll be followed by the final clip where Chuck Todd has a big argument with Peter Navarro about whether the Washington Post is fake news. Oh, well, I guess it's not the final clip if you don't, because there's also the bonus Sandy clip at the end for the Sandy fans out there. But on the trade war and the looming trade war with China issue, I'm going to compare the way the new Trump administration economic advisor Larry Kudlow, who's only been on the job for 5 days, as he pointed out in one interview, how he responds to the fact that he's always been like a lifelong free trader. And this was brought up in a couple of his appearances where he basically, to be a proponent of what Trump's saying about putting tariffs on China, he has to give up everything he said over the last however many years it's been. And, well, in this clip, it's from CNN State of the Union. Jake Tapper, I think, points out both that what Trump's been saying about the trade deficit is pretty nonsensical, because trade deficit doesn't mean that he says $500 billion, which doesn't include, that's how much we buy from China, but doesn't include the $150 billion that we sell to China. And the deficit just means that we're getting more stuff from China than we're sending there, but that's because they have all this cheap stuff we want to buy. It's not like we're losing that. We're giving them money, and we're getting all this cheap Chinese manufactured stuff that we like, and then that creates what's called a trade deficit. But where, how does that get paid back? Well, China invests that money in U.S. T-bills, at least, and buys up U.S. debt. That's basically where that money goes. But it's not really something that hurts us. It just shows the differential in how much we buy from China and how much China buys from us. But it's not like they're stealing $500 billion or even $350 billion from us, as Jake Tapper points out. And then he also points out how these tariffs are not really the solution. And this is actually the longest clip, I think. But it's a good job from Jake Tapper cross-examining Larry Kudlow on how he's changed positions and how a trade war is really bad for the economy, which I will discuss with you after we watch that 4.5-minute clip together over here.
Covering this issue of trade deficits is that the way the president talks about it sometimes frustrates people who are experts on what a trade deficit actually is. There's consensus we should put on the table that China has unfair economic barriers up right now. But it is false to say, as the president tweeted this morning, quote, the U.S. is losing $500 billion a year. As you know, the number is actually $375 billion, according to the Department of Commerce. But more to the point, it's not that the U.S. is losing it. Americans are getting goods and services in exchange for that $375 billion. Before you took this job, you said, quote, the trade deficit is not a reflection of a bad economy. In fact, it's the opposite. Do you think there's a danger here that if the president continues to talk about it this way, as if it's a zero-sum game, the American people will think the goal is to have a zero trade deficit, which is never going to happen with China?
Well, I don't think it's a problem. Look, the president expresses himself as the president expresses himself.
I think personally, and I'm a big supporter of this, China, look, we have had to go in and fire a shot across the bow. China's behavior, it's 20 years now, it's more than unfair trading practices. It's illegal trading practices because they're stealing our property rights, our intellectual property rights. They're forcing technology from our companies to be open so they can get it. And they have tall trade barriers. The president is to some extent right about the trade deficit. They have high barriers. They have high tariffs. This stuff's got to stop. No president's had the backbone to take it up publicly before. So I think he's exactly right. And I say to everybody on this, the problem here is China. It is not President Trump. China's been getting away with this for decades. Past American presidents refused to take them on. I think President Trump's doing exactly the right thing. And I think it's going to generate very positive results, which will grow our American economy. It will help grow China's economy. It will help grow the world economy.
I'm not taking issue with the idea that China is the root of the problem here. There's consensus, and there has been for a long time. And you're right, President Trump is doing something where previous presidents haven't. The question is whether this threat of hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs is the right approach. Just in the last couple months before you took this job, you said the tariffs were, quote, prosperity killers. You pointed to them as one of the causes for the Great Depression. You wrote an op-ed titled, quote, Mr. President, tariffs are really tax hikes. Wouldn't tariffs, if President Trump actually pulled the trigger, be a huge mistake?
No. By the way, Steve Moore and Art Laffer and I wrote that piece. We didn't like the blanket tariffs. We didn't like the blanket tariffs, which would hurt our allies as much or more as our enemies. So we didn't like that, and we think there might have been some downstream problems for the U.S. economy. This one's different. Look,
you would support if the president pulled the trigger on the hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs against China?
Yes, I would.
You would?
I absolutely would. No free market guy, no free trade guy disagrees on this subject. The Guild, if you will, the brethren of the economics profession, have all agreed that something has to be done. Now, Jake, remember, this is a process, right? No tariffs have been implemented yet. Very important.
I get that, yeah.
In this last round that was announced late last week, the president asked Bob Lighthizer, our trade diplomat, to consider whether an additional round of tariffs would be necessary or useful. And part of that is because after we made the first round, the Chinese response was unsatisfactory, to put it least. So the president's trying to get their attention again. The process may include tariffs. I cannot rule that out. It may rest eventually on negotiations. We will see how the president wants to do it. He's pretty good at negotiating, but he's also pretty good at standing his ground. And again, this, look at it this way. The American economy, what are we? We are driven by advances in technology, which are the backbone of our entrepreneurship. They're the backbone of our ingenuity. That's the reason the American economy is #1 in the world. And by the way, we should talk about this because it's really flourishing under Trump policies. But I'm just saying, China cannot be allowed to steal our technology because that's the bread and butter of our economy.
I hear what you're saying, but you also seem to be saying...
So I think Jake Tapper did a pretty good job of cross-examining Larry Kudlow there with the way he's basically put his, I think what Doonesbury used to call it, put his manhood in a blind trust. That's what they used to talk about George H.W. Bush when he became vice president for Ronald Reagan and gave up everything he said about voodoo economics and all of his criticisms of Ronald Reagan during the 1980 primary campaign, for those of us who are old enough to remember way back then. And Larry Kudlow has definitely given up a lot of what he said about free trade. And he did a pretty good job in that clip of explaining how he's given up all of his previous views on free trade and tariffs. And I think he did a much worse job in the clip after next I'm going to show when he talks about Mark Zuckerberg and how he shouldn't be wearing a t-shirt when he comes to testify before Congress, which he sounds a little bit more cranky. But the next clip I'm going to show before that is the one of Peter Navarro over on Fox News Sunday. I'm pretty sure, right? Yeah. No, I'm sorry. This is over on NBC's Meet the Press, where I think Chuck Todd also does a pretty good job of cross-examining Peter Navarro on the mixed signals that the Trump administration is giving out, how, you know, we're going to be really tough on China and impose all these tariffs, but, oh, there's not really going to be a trade war, and Wall Street shouldn't be so upset. That's the contradiction that I think Chuck Todd does a good job of pointing out, and Peter Navarro, I think, does a not as good job of defending the Trump administration tariff policy when compared to Larry Kudlow in the previous clip. This is Peter Navarro talking to Chuck Todd, not about fake news, which is the last clip I'm going to show, where I think that's my favorite clip that I mentioned was going to be at the very end. But here's tariff policy, Chuck Todd, Peter Navarro, another White House economic advisor who is not like Larry Kudlow, who's a real free trader who like gave up his beliefs. This Peter Navarro never really had any coherent beliefs. He's just like a kind of extremist, populist, anti-China, true Trump believer, as I think you will see when we watch this clip together over here.
With this, it seems as if the administration wants to have it both ways, telling the Chinese we're serious about tariffs, these are coming, here's the list, but then telling the public, no, 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 it's a negotiating ploy, it's a negotiating tactic. Which is it?
It's both, Mr. Todd. Basically, what we have here is a situation where every American understands that China is stealing our intellectual property. They're forcing the transfer of our technology when companies go to China. And by doing that, they steal jobs from America, they steal factories from America, and we run an unprecedented $370 billion a year trade deficit in goods. This is an unsustainable situation. What we've done in a very measured way over the course of many months is develop a plan to make the situation significantly better. That plan is being implemented. It includes both tariffs to recover the damages that China inflicts, as well as investment restrictions. We are proceeding in a measured way, and those tariffs will be imposed and those investment restrictions will be imposed. At the same time, there are discussions that are going on with the Chinese, with Ambassador Robert Lighthizer and with Secretary Mnuchin, but we need to understand that we can go back to 2003 when we began to talk about these issues, and talk has not been cheap. It's been very, very expensive for the American people.
How do you expect the Chinese to take the tariff threat seriously if you're publicly saying it's a negotiating tactic and that, you know what, we're not serious about it per se, we want to talk, but you haven't also really made it clear what specific action do you want from the Chinese to prevent these tariffs from being implemented?
I don't believe if you played back what I said just a minute ago, that I said it was a negotiating tactic. It's not. We're listening to the Chinese. We're willing to work with them. This government, through Bush, Obama, and now the courage and vision of Donald Trump, we're willing to listen to the Chinese, but we're clear-eyed about this. We're moving forward on a measured way with tariffs, with investment restrictions. What we want from China, and what we want from China is very clear. We want fair and reciprocal trade. We want them to stop stealing our stuff. We want them to guard intellectual property, not take it from us. And look, in your monologue at the beginning of this, you played a clip from the president. He said we'd already lost the trade war. Well, Bush and Obama, over the course of 16 years, basically stood by while we lost over 70,000 factories, millions of manufacturing jobs, and much of our traditional manufacturing base. What is at stake here, Mr. Todd, is the industries of the future, artificial intelligence, robotics, quantum computing.
I understand.
And what's at stake is not just our economic prosperity, if I may, it's also our national security, because many of these industries of the future have profound military implications.
I understand all that, and I've heard these complaints for years from many of these industries. What is the metric?
But you never saw action.
Let me ask this, though.
So, like I said before, I showed that clip. I think that Peter Navarro was using pretty much the same talking points as Larry Kudlow in the previous clip, but I just don't think he did as good a job presenting them. On the other hand, I think that Chuck Todd was kind of focusing on an issue that wasn't really as important, which was the mixed signals that the Trump administration is giving out on the trade war, which actually might not be the worst negotiating position, to have mixed signals coming out so that China doesn't really know exactly the U.S. position, but that's really only a minor point compared to the more important point that Chuck Todd pointed out in the news summary, and that I really, as I said earlier, subscribe to, that this is really all about playing to Trump's base and taking on China in a way that in the end probably isn't going to amount to any real actions, which I think is the subtext of the last two clips I showed you, although you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And I've been reading the comments along the way. I notice I've gotten a couple super chat contributions. Nelson 100, I appreciate your, I think it was £10. Is that British pounds? I think it was £10 from the UK. I appreciate that super chat contribution. And then Carrie091 asked me a question that I'm going to deal with briefly before I get to the final topic that of the Trump attack on tech companies and Facebook and Amazon. But Carrie091 asked, can the Stormy Daniels lawsuit result in actual legal, criminal, ethics law violation consequences for Trump, or is it just a matter of public opinion humiliation for him? And there is not ethics, but there's a campaign finance violation that could come out of the whole Stormy Daniels scandal, which is, if you remember John Edwards, when he was running for president, he was prosecuted for paying off this woman who had his illegitimate, well, I don't like the word illegitimate, but his out-of-wedlock baby, and he was eventually acquitted. But the question is, whoever paid off Stormy Daniels for $130,000, is that an in-kind contribution to the Trump campaign? Because it was like late, it was sometime in October near the election. It definitely helped the Trump campaign, and you're only allowed to contribute like, I think it's $2,600 in the primary and $2,600 in the general election, if I'm remembering correctly. So $130,000 if it's Michael Cohen, Trump's attorney, who contributed that to the Trump campaign. And so it could be a campaign finance violation both for Michael Cohen and the Trump campaign if that's a donation, in-kind contribution to the Trump campaign. That could actually be criminal, because that, of course, the Federal Election Commission is so dysfunctional, it would never really come up with any kind of ruling finding that to be any kind of violation. But there is the John Edwards precedent, so there could be some U.S. attorney somewhere, though, of course, Trump appointed all of the U.S. attorneys, but maybe Robert Mueller could look at it. They say Robert Mueller might be looking at it as a campaign finance violation. So thank you, Carrie091, for that super chat contribution and asking that question. And now I want to get to the last couple clips before, well, I promised that Peter Navarro clip arguing with Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press about whether the Washington Post is fake news. But before I get to that, I have two clips on the Trump attack on Amazon and also the upcoming Mark Zuckerberg testimony to Congress about Facebook privacy violations. First, I want to show Larry Kudlow talking to Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday about whether, of course, Fox News, what they're worried about when it comes to the tech companies is, is the Trump administration going to regulate tech companies too much? Because, we don't want to regulate rich people and corporations. That's what Fox News is worried about. And you'll see Larry Kudlow here does that attack on Mark Zuckerberg for possibly wearing a t-shirt to testify to Congress, and how he has this terrible dress code. And I'll make a couple more comments, but I've been talking long enough, and I want to show, the love fest between Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday and Larry Kudlow, who's been 5 days in the Trump administration. By the end of it, I edited in this clip from when Chris Wallace says goodbye to Larry Kudlow, and by the end of it, I'm thinking to myself, you know, you two guys need to get a room, but you can let me know what you think after we watch that 2-minute, 38-second clip from Fox News Sunday this morning over here.
One of the other drags on the market right now is the concern that Washington is going to regulate big tech. Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Facebook, is going to testify before Congress this week. Does the president want to see Washington regulate how Facebook uses its users' data, what it does with its users' data, and also how it screens ads?
Well, look, I think the president right now will be intently watching the congressional hearings. I think that's going to be step number one. I think he has his doubts. Whether Facebook has violated protocols, I don't know. We will see. I wish Mr. Zuckerberg, I hope he comes to Congress wearing a nice business suit and shirt and tie, so he'll be taken more seriously.
Not a T-shirt.
Right. I'm tired of that T-shirt hoodie stuff. You guys running one of the largest corporations in the world, for heaven's sakes.
But would the president conceptually agree to regulate?
We're waiting on Congress. Let's see what comes out of that before the administration takes any particular action.
All right. Amazon. The president keeps hitting the company for failing to pay taxes for its deal with the post office. Here he was on Air Force One.
Well, Amazon is just not on an even playing field. You know, they have a tremendous lobbying effort, in addition to having the Washington Post, which is, as far as I'm concerned, another lobbyist.
In fact, the post office makes money off Amazon. It doesn't lose money, and Amazon collects taxes in all 45 states. So is this just talk, or is the president seriously considering taking action against Amazon?
The president is asking that Amazon and all the internet retailers have a level playing field with respect to tax. And while it's true...
But Amazon is one of the companies that does have a level playing field.
In recent years, they've done much better in collecting state taxes, sales taxes. However, they don't always collect local sales taxes, and we've had too much protection in this area. They're not a fledgling industry anymore. So what the president is saying, he's raising this issue for discussion. I don't think it's aimed at anybody. We just need a level playing field, and you're going to have a court decision very soon, Chris, that's going to make this more explicit.
Okay, I got a minute, Larry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Always good to talk with you, and I keep listening and learning.
You've been great. You've been absolutely one of the best pupils down through the years.
That probably blew all of my credibility. Thank you, Larry. It's always a pleasure.
That was a joke and a compliment.
Thank you. Up next, reaction.
So what do you think? Get a room? Chris Wallace, Larry Kudlow, get a room? I don't know. That seemed not the most confrontational interview, although, you know, Chris Wallace did bring up a couple good points there, and I think Larry Kudlow did a much worse job in that interview than the previous clip I showed from CNN State of the Union, where he did a fairly good job of trying to explain why he had given up all these free trade beliefs he's had over the years. I guess he prep for that a lot better than that last question about Mark Zuckerberg, and you know, he better wear a suit because you know, he's the head of one of the largest corporations, and you can't wear a t-shirt. T-shirts are the real problem that are you know, that's what we really have to worry about in terms of Facebook. But before I leave the tech company question, I have one more clip. This is a Republican Senator, John Kennedy. I don't know exactly why there's a Republican senator named John Kennedy, but it just happens to be the truth. And he was over on CBS's Face the Nation talking to Margaret Brennan, the host of Face the Nation, and you'll see he uses a whole bunch of like down-home Southern expressions to try to talk about what Mark Zuckerberg should be saying when he comes to testify to Congress. And this is, I think, the evidence that supports what I was saying earlier about how Mark Zuckerberg is going to get reamed by Republicans and Democrats alike tomorrow when he comes and testifies, which is why I included this 2.5-minute clip from CBS's Face the Nation yesterday morning over here.
Facebook has acknowledged that some of its search tools were used by malicious actors to obtain information, and also that 87 million users had private information shared with other organizations without their consent. What do you need to hear from Mark Zuckerberg?
I don't want to hurt Facebook. I don't want to regulate them half to death. But we have a problem. Our promised digital utopia has minefields in it. Mr. Zuckerberg has not exhausted himself being forthcoming. We had one hearing. Mr. Zuckerberg sent his lawyer, very bright, very articulate, could talk a dog off a meat wagon, but he didn't say anything. And my biggest worry in all of this, and I have many, many questions, Mr. Zuckerberg, but my biggest worry with all this is that the privacy issue and what I call the propagandist issue are both too big for Facebook to fix. And that's the frightening part.
Too big for Facebook to fix. Does that mean that lawmakers like you need to seek regulations to fix it for them?
It may be the case. I would rather do it with Facebook and the other social media platforms. Look, we've got to talk about the initial bargain. Is it fair for me to give up all of my personal data to Facebook and apparently everybody else in the Western Hemisphere in exchange for me being able to see what some of my high school buddies had for dinner Saturday night? Who owns my data? Do I own it, or does Facebook own it? The service agreement with Facebook, it's written in Swahili. Nobody understands it. Should I have the right to opt in as opposed to opt out, put the burden on Facebook? Should I have the right to erase my data? Should I have the right to demand that Facebook get my permission before it sells the data? We all know that poison is being spread on social media, not just Facebook. How are we going to stop it? And by the way, while we're talking about that, what's poison? First Amendment concerns.
I mean,
these are very deep issues, and they're bigger than Cambridge Analytica.
They're bigger than Cambridge Analytica, but I think the issues are also bigger than down-home expressions like that lawyer was so persuasive he could talk a dog off a meat wagon, or I don't know, the whole idea of, I don't think that Margaret Brennan did the best job there of cross-examining Republican Senator John Kennedy about exactly what type of regulations that Republicans and maybe even Democrats will be seeking against Facebook. I think there's going to be, if nothing else, there's going to be more regulation of political advertising on Facebook, but I guess we'll find out tomorrow when Mark Zuckerberg actually comes and testifies. And before I finish the show, I do have that bonus Sandy clip, although Sandy's been lying down there snoring. If you listen closely during the silences when I've been talking, you might have heard Sandy snoring, although I think I woke her up now. But I will have a 10-second bonus Sandy clip at the end. But before that, this is my favorite clip from the Sunday morning news analysis shows. This is NBC's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, arguing with the new White House economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, about whether the Washington Post is fake news. And Chuck Todd, I guess, is getting sick of the term fake news. You can let me know what you think after you watch this 1-minute, 51-second clip with me over here.
What's going on in the West Wing? And simply, does John Kelly still have the president's confidence? A Washington Post story over the weekend says this: Kelly has threatened to resign on multiple occasions. It's sort of a weekly event, one senior White House official quipped, though officials explained his declarations as expressions of momentary frustration. Have you heard of John Kelly threatening to resign, Mr. Navarro? And can you say whether the president still has confidence in him?
Look, every day of his adult life, John Kelly's gotten up in the morning to serve America. He's a great man, a courageous man. He serves the president. He has the president's ear. He runs the West Wing well. That's all I know. That's all I see. What you don't see about him sometimes is the light and humorous side of him. He's actually a pretty funny Irish guy sometimes. But he has the confidence of the president, and he's getting the job done. And when you read stuff in the Washington Post, frankly, that's fake news most of the time.
All right. I think that expression is a pretty unfair thing to say about a major news organization.
Well, not to the Washington Post.
Navarro,
I mean, look,
that's a cheap shot.
Not a cheap. Mr. Todd, that is not a cheap shot, because if you look at the newspapers that I read every day across the spectrum, the Washington Post, in my judgment, tends to attack the president more than any other newspaper in its news stories. You can do anything you want in your editorial, sir, but you cannot do that in your news stories.
I'd say that the term fake news is a way to is not exactly a way to hold up the First Amendment, especially when the Russian government just this morning is calling using that phrase.
I used to deliver the Washington Post in high school in Bethesda, Chevy Chase, and guess what? That was a good paper back then. It's not right now.
Peter Navarro, I will leave it there. Dr. Navarro, thanks for coming on and sharing your views. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, joining me now is...
So there you go. That's the clip I promised you. I think Chuck Todd did a fairly good job of defending the mainstream media against the Trump accusation of fake news, and especially the Washington Post for reporting that there might be another staff shakeup and that the White House Chief of Staff John Kelly is losing power. I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm sure they're writing their articles based on journalistic sourcing. You know, sources have their own reason. You know, sometimes stories in the mainstream media aren't always correct, but it's not because they're fake news. It's because the media is not a perfect mirror of events. It is sometimes filtered through sources who have their own biases. And anyway, I appreciated that defense from Chuck Todd. I'd like to see, you know, that happens pretty often, more and more, from the mainstream media pushing back against the delegitimization of the Fourth Estate by the Trump administration, which some people say could be a prelude to a more authoritarian government. That's what people worry about, so that's why I'm always pleased to see that happen. And anyway, that's the last clip I wanted to show you from the news media. I really have to finish up soon, but I did promise a bonus Sandy clip. Sandy is lying down over there sleeping. She's back to sleep, but this is very early this morning, where the lack of my Trump coverage for this week seemed to be confusing Sandy. She was wondering what happened to the show. It was this is like maybe 5 a.m., 6 a.m. this morning. You can see it's a little bit light out. And I asked Sandy, she's already ready for the show over here. Where's the show? Where's the show? So that's the bonus Sandy clip for the Sandy fans out there. I'm supposed to be at a rally at the Sacramento State Capitol building in like 41 minutes, so I got to finish the show, and I may actually take video of that rally and upload it to my YouTube channel later. You can let me know if you want to see that, but I appreciate all my live viewers, all my recorded viewers. I especially appreciate the people who gave the super chat contributions during the live show. If you're watching this as a recorded show, you can also give me a direct contribution on PayPal at paypal.com/ or paypal.me/liberalviewer. There's a link down in the video description. YouTube takes out like 30% from the super chat contributions. PayPal only takes out like 5%, or if you do a direct like cash contribution, there's no PayPal percentage. And then you can also become one of my Patreon supporters on become a patron. I think Patreon takes out like 11%, so it's better than YouTube. And at the $5 per month level, I have been giving out these #LiberalViewer stickers that are weatherproof vinyl that you can stick anywhere you want. At the $10 a month level, these ACLU constitutions, and I'm letting you ask for 100. No one's asked so far for the 150 character favorite part of the Constitution handwritten inscription, or for me to send it to the White House, but I'm willing to do that, which is kind of like that joke from Saturday Night Live where they're sending vegetables. But anyway, that's the end of the program, and I will be probably uploading an ACLU rally video sometime in the next 12 hours, and then I'll be back next week, not on Monday, but on Sunday. By the way, this week is the 5-year anniversary coming up of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. I will be showing a clip from LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup #1 back in April 2013, 5 years ago. So look for that, or you can go and watch the original episode, demonetized by YouTube because it includes a clip of Larry Flynt talking about his First Amendment case against Jerry Falwell, that, you know, in Hustler magazine. So of course it's demonetized, but you can look forward to that next week. And until next week, and until I upload my next video of a rally or whatever, there are going to be actually more news events coming up this week that I don't even have time to talk about. It's a very busy ACLU week, but until my next video upload and until next Sunday when I have time to talk to you, I guess I will be seeing you all around the internet. Right, Sandy? Right, Sandy?